Golin, who is the executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. He also serves as lead staff for the organization's pluralistic social justice initiative, Jews for a Secular Democracy, which works to mobilize Jewish voices to defend the separation of religion and government. Paul is a writer, a speaker, an advocate, and consultant on issues including secularity, intermarriage, disaffiliation, and inclusion. He has co-authored 2 books, and his writing has appeared in The Forward, Jewish Week, Huffington Post, and elsewhere. He describes himself as the white Ashkenazi Jewish half of a Japanese, Jewish/Japanese, multiracial household, and administers the Japanese page on Facebook. So with that, I would like to present Paul Golin.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. It's great to be with you. Today, I want to share with you what Humanistic Judaism is, why it's meaningful to me, and how the way it works might be meaningful to you as well, even if you're not Jewish. And I really much prefer to be in dialogue and kind of want to get to the Q&A as quickly as I can, but I want to share with you a bit of a frontal presentation with 5 key points. And as I go through them, I'll kind of identify potential tangents, and I'll try not to go down any of those tangents too far, because I really want to be guided by what you're interested in and what you'd like to talk about. So the first point of these 5 I want to make is that Jews are remarkably secular. You may already know that, but you may not know the numbers behind it, and we're humanists, so it's always, show me the numbers. Let's see the proof. Let's see the data. And, Jews are included when they do these wide surveys of Americans as far as, religious surveys. The Pew Research Foundation in particular has been tracking the increase in secularity over the past couple of decades. But every once a decade or so, a study is done specifically of American Jewry. And it's harder to do because there's not a lot of us, and it's expensive to do, so it's about once a decade. But the last one was fairly recent in 2020 by Pew Research. And what they found is, first of all, if you don't know, there are about 7 million American Jews, which is slightly more than 2% of all Americans. So we are a tiny minority, even though we are disproportionately represented in various aspects of life. And breaking down that 2% is what this study does. And this study, a question was asked for what I believe is the first time, and I've looked at studies of American Jewry going back to 1970, and the question that was asked was, do you believe in the God of the Bible? And actually, I'll open it up for any guesses of what percentage of American Jewry said, yes, I believe in the God of the Bible. You want to just shout it out?
40.
I missed it.
2%.
10 and 40.
40%. Okay. That's a good range. It's 26%. 2% is really low. 26%, I thought, was surprisingly low for the answer of, do you believe in the God of the Bible? That compares to 56% of all Americans who say they believe in the God of the Bible, which is another presentation for, I think, a very scary conversation. But Jews said only 26% said yes to I believe in the God of the Bible. And Pew did ask a follow-up question, which I thought was also very excellent of them to do. For those who said no, they don't believe in the God of the Bible, do you believe in any other higher power or spiritual force? And on this one, they got 50% of US Jews who said yes to that, leaving 22% of US Jews who said they don't believe in the God of the Bible or any other higher power or spiritual force. That's 22% of what I call, Pew doesn't call them this, but I call them flat out atheists, compares to only 10% of all Americans who would say they don't believe in any higher power or the God of the Bible. So Jews are more than double the rate of atheists in this country. And I think if Pew had asked an additional follow-up question, which I wish they had asked this and they did not, but for those who said, the 50% of US Jews who said that they believe in some kind of higher power or spiritual force, my follow-up question to them is, does this higher power or spiritual force interact with humans or interject into human affairs? I bet at least half of those folks would say no, right? Their belief is in some kind of, in Star Wars, it's called the Force. It's something that ties us all together, but it's kind of nebulous thing. And basically, it's not going to answer prayers. It's not going to give a crap about you. And so combining what I would guess is more than half of that, you have pretty much half of all US Jews that would be considered atheist agnostic if they were being asked these kind of questions. And it's not surprising to me. I haven't seen a sociological study as to why Jews are atheists at such higher rates than other Americans. I have some theories. I am what is called 3G. I'm the third generation of Holocaust survivors. There's a group for 3G folks because there is, now they're finding trauma can be passed on genetically, but there is family trauma. Certainly my grandparents were survivors. My mom was born in a displaced persons camp in Berlin right after the war. And to me, I don't see how Jews can come out of the Holocaust and still believe in a God that interjects into human affairs. So I think that was certainly one aspect of it. But that said, and I recognize that some folks may not have I'm presuming I'm speaking to a very well-educated crowd. So I presume that you have some kind of understanding of what Judaism is, who the Jews are, what the history is a little bit. So there were plenty of secular Jews even before the Holocaust, so I don't think the Holocaust invented secular Judaism. I know it didn't. There's a photo that in my family of my grandmother with her 6 siblings, all of whom were murdered in the Holocaust. And they are sitting, so this is the 1930s, they're young people, they're in their teens and 20s, they're sitting around a table in all black turtlenecks, so like super mod, and there's no beards, there's no yarmulkes, the ritual skull caps. They were secular, and they were involved in what was called the Bund, which was a Yiddish labor movement. They were socialists or communists in Poland, and they were ardently secular. So I'm at least 3rd generation atheist Jew. And so basically, alongside with the Enlightenment in Europe, which opened up the opportunity for some people to become secular, reduce the control that the church had, there was a parallel in the Jewish community called the Haskalah, which is Hebrew for enlightenment, that allowed Jews to become secular, those who wanted to. And certainly there were many, many. And the switch that happened, I think, is an interesting one. In the early 20th century, secular Judaism, socialist Judaism, red diaper babies, was a massive percentage of the organized Jewish community. And it is much less so, or certainly less visible in the organized Jewish community today for a variety of reasons. So that's perhaps one tangent that we might go down at some point. But it was interesting over the past decade to see the rebirth of it through, I like to call him Uncle Bernie Sanders, who kind of revitalized, certainly among young Jews, a secular Jewish identity based on advocacy for economic equality. So secular Jews are a significant percent of the Jewish community, and this is point 2, which relates to it. Judaism is not just a religion. And this is hard for folks sometimes to wrap their mind around if they grew up in another religion. And again, this is part of the shift that has happened over the 20th century of Jews actually being okay with identifying or being identified as a religion. It allowed Jews in America to become equal, because at the beginning of the 20th century, Jews certainly were not. And at the end of the 20th century, they had attained a success and a level of privilege in the United States that had not existed in 2,000 years of diaspora Judaism. So one of the shifts that led to religion, also the privilege that most Jews in America are Ashkenazi, like I am, meaning we present white. And there's an excellent book called When Jews Became White Folk, came out in, I want to say, the 70s, but it traced that shift. And again, another tangent if folks want to go down that road. But my point here is that Judaism is much more than a religion. It is a culture. It is really, I want to say ethnicity, but it's multiple ethnicities. I mentioned that I'm an Ashkenazic Jew, but there are Sephardic Jews from the Middle East. There are Ethiopian Jews, and there was a Chinese Jewish community up until a couple of decades ago. So, and each with their own culture, with some commonalities and many differences. So when it is a ethnicity, a cultural identity, people who are not religious can still identify with the culture and with the ethnicity. So one way that Pew addresses this in that 2020 study is something that has actually been done in previous studies as well, but I think Pew really refined it, or at least they've created the new term of art. The new term of art is Jews of no religion. So to get at the full cohort of American Jewry, to be inclusive of a secular Jewish identity, Pew asked survey takers, what is your religion? And they gave a pretty complete list, Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I think they break down Christian to Catholic, or Protestant, the various denominations, and atheist, agnostic, and nothing in particular. And you can only pick one. So the Jews who picked Jewish are in automatically Jew by religion, because the question was, what is your religion, if any? If someone checked atheist or agnostic or nothing in particular, Pew asked follow-up questions to determine whether they were Jewish by culture or heritage. And if someone on the follow-up question said, yes, my parents are Jewish, or I was raised Jewish, or I am a cultural Jew, they become Jews of no religion. It is not directly related to atheism, and this is the confusing part. But it's important to note that this cohort of Jews of no religion is rising. And I don't know if you've been following the Pew's surveys of the nuns, not the Catholic clergy nuns, but the NONES, people who say they have no religion or no religious affiliation. This is the kind of Jewish complement to that. They're not called Jewish nuns, they're called Jews of no religion. And the whole rest of the report was basically comparing Jews by religion and Jews of no religion to kind of show how much difference there is between them. I feel like it's kind of an unfair dichotomy, but, and again, another tangent we may want to go down about how they're different and so on. But my point here is that because Judaism is not just a religion, Pew, in their, I think, really correct methodology, needed to find ways to find Jews who do not say Jewish as their religion. And what was interesting to me is, this was not in Pew's study, but I used the numbers to break it down. They found about 30% of their cohort of 7 million Jews are these Jews of no religion. And of those, they're not all, like some of them do believe in the God of the Bible. Some of them do believe in a higher power or spiritual force. But they have a significant percentage who are atheists. And it's a much higher percentage than Jews by religion. But when you compare those two cohorts, and remember, Jews by religion is about 70% of American Jews, there are almost as many atheists among Jews by religion as in that Jews of no religion group. And what does this mean? It means that people like me, who are secular and atheists, when asked, what is your religion, still say Jewish, because we know what the question is getting at, right? And we want to answer the rest of the questions as Jews. And when this came out, I had written a piece saying that I didn't get asked this, I didn't get to participate in this survey, but I would really struggle with that question if I had a choice and could only pick one between Jewish and atheist, because as important as it is for me to share my Jewish identity, I feel like in America, being openly atheist is even more challenging in certain ways. And I would also want to answer questions about that as well. And again, I didn't take the survey, but if I did, I probably still would have said Jewish on what is your religion, and hope that they would then ask me about belief, in which case I would get to say I'm an atheist. The third point I want to bring up is, what is humanistic Judaism? How did humanistic Judaism emerge out of all of this? Our internal marketing tagline is that humanistic Judaism is meaningful Jewish community without God. So as I said, Jews have been secular and secularizing at pretty high rates since the Enlightenment. So there's already a stream of expressions of Jewish identity that are secular. But in the mid-60s, a Reform rabbi named Sherwin Wine, he was ordained in the Reform movement of Judaism, which is certainly a religious denomination, but one that really kind of overthrew a lot of the Jewish laws. Like, for example, they don't keep kosher. I don't know if you've heard of some of the other Jewish denominations, but I'll tell you that the conservative movement, which is the movement I grew up in, actually emerged out of Reform Judaism because there was this famous banquet for new rabbis, and they served shrimp. And that was too far for the folks who were there, and they split off and launched conservative Judaism, and it's referred to, I believe, as the treif banquet. So treif is Yiddish for not kosher. And but anyway, and so conservative Judaism is much more like Orthodox Judaism in terms of liturgy, in terms of still wanting to adhere to the Jewish laws, which is called halakha, and that is you've probably heard of kosher if you've heard of nothing else. Among Jewish law, you've heard that kosher, the laws of the dietary laws of keeping kosher. And what they may or may not prevent. So shrimp is definitely a no-no. All shellfish is a no-no. All pig products are no-no, etc. But there's so much more, and there's so many rules that Orthodox Jews today still try to maintain. Conservative Jews a lot less so, but still kind of give lip service to it. Reform Jews a lot less, and humanistic Jews not at all, really. It's important for us to understand it, I think, and to know why we reject it. So this Reform rabbi named Sherwin Wine in 1963 started a new community, a congregation in suburban Detroit. And over the next year or so, with volunteer leaders, he struck out of the liturgy God or any reference to supernatural and replaced it with the ideas of humanism. And that's where we get to humanistic Judaism. And so it looked a lot like what was happening at that time in the 50s and 60s as Jews moved out of inner cities to the suburbs. There was an explosion in suburban synagogues. This movement kind of is influenced by that. But because Rabbi Sherwin was deeply involved in the humanistic movement, he was able to incorporate those ideals, but he still loved being a congregational rabbi. He loved celebrating Jewish holidays. He loved celebrating his Jewish identity and raising children to have a knowledge of their heritage and their culture and their ethnicity. So he retained all of what he felt was good about Jewish communal and congregational life and simply rewrote the liturgy. That was the innovation. And we have remained a tiny denomination, but for the tens of thousands of folks who have been humanistic Jews over the past 60-something years, it provided meaning. It provided an outlet of Jewish expression that they were simply not going to do at any other venue because the words were the sticking point for them. They did not want to say things that they didn't believe, and they only wanted to say things that they do believe. And again, I came out of the conservative movement. I knew from a very young age that I don't believe in God, and I felt completely isolated because there was no conversation. And I looked around and I felt that surely if people are spending 3.5 hours on Saturday mornings praying to God that they believe in God, and there was no conversation about whether they do or not. So it was marginalizing, and I felt like I must be the weird one. I have nobody to talk to about this. I wish I had known what was happening in suburban Detroit, and that there was a whole community. There was multiple communities of people who did talk about it and were open and honest about it. So like many, many people, I would have been gone after age 13 when the bar mitzvah, which is supposed to graduate children into adulthood and full citizenship in synagogue life, for many secular people, it is graduation out of the Jewish community. And there were other things, though, that kept me connected. Again, won't go too far down that tangent. Happy to talk about it if it's of interest to you. So that is the key difference for humanistic Judaism compared to the other denominations of Judaism. But it is still a congregational denomination. We are looking to expand beyond that organizing principle because it's also a philosophy that I think provides a lot of meaning. So that's been the work that I've been doing as executive director of Society for Humanistic Judaism, which is the umbrella body for congregations in the US and Canada, is looking for how else can we express this identity of being openly secular and openly Jewish. And one answer to that is the fourth point I want to make, 4 out of 5, so we're almost there, which is that there is a benefit to ritual, even for secular people. And I would make this argument based on things that we've probably all participated in. And so an example I give, I have 2 kids who one is 8 and one is 11, and when they have their birthday party, what are some things that you think happen at that birthday party? Right? We have cake, we have candles, we sing a song called Happy Birthday. You probably heard it. It is ritualized. It's a ritualized celebration, and it sure has a lot of meaning for my kids. So there are other markers of time that allow us to celebrate throughout the secular calendar that most of us still participate in. I got to meet, unfortunately, he died a few years ago, and I don't know if you know the name, but the editor of, I think it was, he worked for Center for Inquiry and he was in Buffalo, and his name was Tom Flynn, and I think he was the editor, I think it's Free Thought magazine. He was a really interesting character. He had my beard is great, but he had a full-on gray beard and hair, and he kind of looked like Santa. And to show how secular he was, his last few years of his life, he would live stream him going in to work on Christmas to show that Christmas, even though it's a federal holiday, wasn't going to be a holiday for him. So he was anti-ritual. And I had this conversation with him, and I said, surely when you got married, you did some kind of wedding ritual. He's like, nope, we went down to City Hall, signed our names, went out to eat. I'm like, surely you watch the ball drop on New Year's Eve, you try to stay up till midnight and usher in the new year. And he's, nope, every year my wife and I make a point of going to bed at 9:30 on New Year's Eve. And I said, aha, that's your ritual, right? So it's an anti-ritual, but it's still a ritual. It still provides meaning for him, right? So I think all of us, if we think about it, can find rituals that we do that we may not even think of as rituals that are important to us, that bring meaning to our lives. And so for people like me who still find meaning in lighting a Hanukkah menorah, for example, it connects me to my family, to my ancestors who, I like my deceased relatives, all of whom did this and all of whom felt some kind of connection while they were doing it that I also feel. But I now have a new blessing to say that does not reference God or the supernatural when I do it. But even when my kids are using the traditional blessing at my parents' house, they're not praying. They're not thinking this is holy work. This is ritual. It's still totally secular, even with that language. And an example from the other side of my household is my wife is from Japan. Her folks still live there. When we visit Japan, if you ever get a chance to go, there's no way to avoid going to temples. And they're amazing. And there are certain rituals that they do in Japan at temples. For example, they clap twice to wake up the gods. They ring a bell, I think to ward off evil spirits. But I do those when I'm there. I don't believe in evil spirits. I don't believe I'm waking up the gods. I can't even name the gods that they're supposedly waking up with this ritual. But it connects me to being at that temple with my family, with those people who are doing it. They throw coins into a kind of a big bin for good luck. I do that. It doesn't make me Shinto or Buddhist, and it doesn't make me believe in the supernatural aspects of it. But just like with Jews, and there's many parallels between Jews and Japanese, there's no separating out Shintoism and Buddhism from being Japanese. It is so intertwined, the way Hanukkah is for Jews, that most secular Jews still participate in those rituals because of meaning. So my final point is that meaning can come from any source and can still provide value into the lives of secular people. And I think one of the great challenges, and we can go down this tangent as well, if you'd like, is how secular people create meaning and utilize ritual to do so compared to how religion does it. And there's a book by Alain de Botton, who is a British philosopher, called Religion for Atheists. And his basic thesis is secular people are secularizing poorly when you compare it to what religion does well. And his first couple of paragraphs are basically, of course there's no God. It's boring to even debate that. So he's just setting that aside to instead talk about what does religion do right, and how is that not happening and should be happening in secular spaces. And so I thought that might be something that could be a relevant conversation, because I appreciate how much it means to folks to come together as openly humanist, openly secular, and that it is happening in communities around the country. And it requires organizing. It requires membership dues. I think it's a hard sell for a lot of secular people, but I think a lot of secular people are also more isolated and to their own detriment from a large and embracing community that comes together in times of joy and in times of need. And I think the work ahead for all secular communities is to really look at how are we doing this well, what works, what doesn't work, what could we be doing better that would work for more people as we emerge out of religion. I'd like to think we're emerging out of religion. I know sometimes it's hard to see that in America, but I think we're at the very beginning still and at the vanguard of what secular meaning means for folks and how we create that. And that's the kind of work that I'm really excited to be in partnership with groups all around the country, and happy to hear your thoughts and ideas about it. So thank you very much for listening to that intro, but I am more than happy to go in whatever direction you'd like to on anything that I've said or
Mhm.
anything that I didn't say that you'd like me to.
Oh, thank you
And
very much. Thank
are
you
you
very
going
much.
to call on the folks?
Yeah, I will. I would like to, if I could, I'd like to explore a little bit the idea of rituals and celebrations. I've long felt that so many of the celebrations we as a society engage in, whether it be, you gave the examples of Christmas, New Year's, Easter's another example. Many of these examples are, I think, related to observable celestial events like the equinox or solstice. And it's, we need to, I really strongly like the idea of taking on of reclaiming those as what they are and saying, well, wait, we're having this thing because that big ball in the sky does stuff for us. It keeps us alive.
Yeah, I love it. And look, the commonality of the December holidays is bringing light into darkness, right? So you've got candlelighting is pretty common, but just the themes of this is the darkest time. So how do we generate hope? There is a humanistic holiday called Human Lights, right? I think
Yes.
is that December 21st, I want to say.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I've never participated in any event. I don't know if you all do. And this is, again, the challenge with ritual is it feels really awkward the first few times you do it. It doesn't become ritualized until you've done it a whole bunch of times. That's why it's so powerful in religion, is because you start doing it before you even remember. And then for most people grow up in the religions that they are still currently in. There is a lot of religion switching in America, much more now than 50 years ago, but still you are inculcated into it as a child. And so it has that meaning. For me, Hanukkah, I love it because it actually happened, right? Passover, we don't have a store yet, but we're putting together T-shirts, and we're like brainstorming what to put on T-shirts. And one we're working on is like, it has 4 glasses of wine on it, and it says Exodus never happened. I'm just here for the wine. Passover 2024. Passover is, I think, if you've never been to a Passover Seder, get yourself invited. It's really fascinating. It's ritualized, and the story is horrific, and it should raise real questions about this. The story is that God killed all of the firstborn Egyptians, right? That's one of the aspects of it. And if you think not even deeply about that, how unjust that is, the good news is it never happened. But the bad news is, why are we holding on to this? And if you go to a good Seder, that will be part of the conversation. So the good news is that it does get discussed, and rituals can allow you to do that. But for me, Hanukkah is actual history. It's also, there's some very dark aspects to it, but I feel at least like, oh, I'm a history buff, so I'm like, okay, I know what this is connected to. So it's not just doing the ritual, it's what is this related to? And I do agree that the naturalist approach could be very powerful. But like I said, I haven't been to a Human Light. I would be curious to go. If you all have done it, I'd be curious to know what the rituals are. But one thing that I will say that I think fires a lot of humanism is activism as well. So to me, if that relates also to our fragile home planet, then I think you can get people to come on board and do something related to the environment and start to build in some rituals from there.
Mhm.
I'm all for inventing new things, but I also, obviously, what we're doing in Humanistic Judaism is repurposing old things for new meaning. So it's not either or, it's both and.
Okay, thank you. I did have a comment here from Sherry, who wrote, I think Jews, their dogma allows for questioning, and as such may allow for more free, independent thought, thereby being or stating atheistic attitudes.
Yeah, well, we like to tell ourselves that. But like I said, I grew up in a community where I didn't feel safe letting anyone know that I didn't believe in what was being said. And if the conversation had been open up, I definitely would not have been alone. But it was never open. There are questions, and Judaism does allow for that. And again, for those who may not know, the Hebrew Bible, which is certainly featured strongly in Christianity, is not how Jews operate. Even Orthodox Jews are not basing their daily lives on that text. What they're basing it on is the Talmud, which is all conversation and interpretation of the original source text. And in the Talmud, there are debates that go unresolved. Or if they get resolved, the losing argument is recorded because one day maybe it will be the winning argument. And I would attribute the fact that there's so many Jewish lawyers actually to this kind of heritage of debate, right? So debate is not frowned on, but there are certain red lines in certain communities, many communities, that you can't cross. I had worked before coming to Humanistic Judaism. For 16 years, I worked pluralistically across the Jewish community on issues of Jewish intermarriage. When someone who's Jewish marries someone who's not Jewish, which you heard in my bio is me. But it exploded in the 70s, and it's now the majority. More households in the U.S. that are married have one Jewish spouse than two Jewish spouses. But you would never know that from the organized Jewish community. And it's gotten better, but they're still really challenged to address intermarriage in a positive way. For Humanistic Judaism, it's celebrated because when it's a cultural approach, there is no conflict really, because you can do it all. You can do as much Jewish culture as you want and as much Japanese culture. My kids are learning Japanese on Saturdays, and they don't conflict with each other the way monotheistic religions demand that you either believe Jesus was Messiah or not. Like, there is a clear dividing line there, which if you are not participating in religion and only in culture, intermarriage is a wonderful thing, and interracial marriage is a wonderful thing as far as I'm concerned, because I would hope it leads to greater understanding. There's a whole family of people in Tokyo who now know a Jew, which was not the case before they met me. So there is a greater understanding, and my Jewish parents have learned to love to eat raw fish. So win-win.
So sushi with shrimp.
Yeah, we have no problem with that. That would have been the red line for my wife if I said you have to give up shellfish. She would not have married me.
Well, at least I'm glad you found a way to get over that. Had a question here from Robert Bosca. Any thoughts as to how secular countries can add moral teaching without alienating religious groups?
It's an interesting question. I think that morality predates religion, and you can see it in all religions because there are certain commonalities, and ultimately it's the golden rule, which Judaism does a little differently than Christianity, which I think is a fascinating difference, right? If you look at the Hebrew version of it, it is do not do unto others as you would not want them to do unto you. So it's a negative, right? In Christianity, it's do unto others as you would want done unto you, right? Which makes no sense, because what if I'm Christian and I would love to hear you tell me all about what Jesus means to you, right? So do not do unto others is the way I phrase it. But either way, when you get to the bottom line, it is a basic statement of humanity, and it has nothing to do with religion. So I think that there are those common threads that were incorporated into religion, but are certainly exist with secular people, and that's the way to go with that, is to identify the commonalities. It's remarkable that, and maybe you've experienced this, to continue to hear in America, which is still a very religious country, that people just can't understand where, if you don't believe in eternal reward and punishment, how can you be a good person? And I think Ricky Gervais says it beautifully, and he incorporated it into one of his shows. He's a comedian, if you don't know him, but he's openly atheist, and he has some great quotes. And in this show, this woman asked him, how can you, what prevents you from killing and from murdering and raping as much as you want if you don't believe in God? And he said, I do rape and murder as much as I want, which is zero. And what kind of problems you must have if you have to fear divine retribution, and that's what keeps you from murder? So all of it is I think you can kind of just step back and look at, what is the human commonalities of morality, and one of them is murder is bad, in every religion, and do not do unto others. Those kind of things are the basis, I think, for all human morality.
Okay, thanks. You must have been preaching to the choir here, because I don't have any comments in chat.
Suzanne has been waving her hand. Do you
Oh,
want
Suzanne, you have to unmute. You need to raise your hand.
If I put my virtual hand up, then it obscures my captioning.
Oh.
So you still sound like a religious person to me. I was raised without a religion in a mostly, well, no, I was a Brooklyn baby and I was exposed to all different cultures, but then I moved to a Christian area where, okay, they were Christian. But then I grew up and I went and I worked at a day camp that I came home to my mother and I said, I loved everybody. They're so cool. It's like they really care about their kids and they put their kids first and this and that. And after a couple of years at the camp with the name, she said something to me like, I think there's a lot of Jewish people at that camp where you are. And I was like, oh yeah, like half of them. But so I say to you, you talk about humanistic Judaism being that you believe in your cultural things. As a non-believer, I was never able to pick any synagogue, church, religious building to go into and be part of, to join the community, because I don't believe in the background. I don't believe, and so you, even with your background, how would I choose the proper synagogue if I wanted to do that? So you grew up in a culture. Oh, and so I have a Christmas tree because my family had Christmas trees, and it's a holiday when we get together. And my holidays happen to be like, I'll follow an Easter tradition and go and play with eggs. And before, I didn't even question these things. I mean, my mother would have said something like, well, we're celebrating the return of light.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because she didn't, but my friends are all like, well, they didn't believe in their religion, whatever it was. But then once they had children, they went back to their respective churches. And the ones who are Christians mixed with Jews, if mom was the woman, they went to a synagogue. And if so, anyway.
Yeah, so look, I think so first of all, a couple of points. Humanistic Judaism is a religion. It is a non-theistic religion, which I kind of even hate saying this or explaining it, but there are other non-theistic religions. So you may have heard of ethical culture, also founded by a Jew, a rabbi's son here in New York City, and his first sermon, or one of his first sermons, was about how he didn't believe in God. And the congregation kind of said, maybe you're not the heir to our rabbinate here. He's a rabbi's son. He became a rabbi. They thought he was going to be their rabbi, Felix Adler. So he went and founded ethical culture. This like 150 years ago. And he stripped it of all ethnic identifying aspects. So there was no Jewish anything, because he saw it as a universalist approach. But they do ritual, and they're categorized as a non-theistic religion, and there are a couple of others out there as well. And for people who are averse to any kind of expression of religion in any way, it's not comfortable, and I get that. And so ritual, for some people, maybe stepping up to something that doesn't feel quite comfortable yet, and that on our end, we have to make the case for why, if you push through that discomfort the first couple of times, it will actually provide you with something really meaningful for the rest of your life. Putting up a Christmas tree doesn't tell you anything about the religious beliefs of the person putting up the Christmas tree. I just mentioned I worked with interfaith families for many years and the Jewish communal approach to it. And when the Jewish community sees a Christmas tree in an interfaith family's home, they immediately said Christian family. And that made no sense because it told you nothing about the Jewish aspect of what that family was doing. But it was so threatening to them without actually talking to people like you who put up a Christmas tree as a remnant from a religious path that didn't even exist by the time you were born, but it's still there because that piece of it is what is meaningful. That piece of it is your family memories. And so some people feel like you got to get rid of it all if we're really going to be fully secular. And I don't. I think that if we can articulate it openly about what is it we do and don't believe here, then anything goes. I mean, I go to art museums. There was amazing art that came out of religious themes in all cultures. And it doesn't mean I need to, I mean, I'm less interested in it than I am the Impressionists, but it doesn't mean I have to like turn away and not look at this amazing talent that someone just happened to dedicate their whole life in painting different angles of Jesus. But that is, you know, it could still be amazing art. So I think there's a balance that has to be found. But my goal in doing this is to really open up the conversation. And in the organized Jewish community, even today, I left out one denomination which is smaller, which is called Reconstructionist Judaism, which comes closest to us, because if you talk to their high-level people, their rabbinic leadership, they'll say God is a metaphor. They still use all the same religious liturgy. It sure looks like everyone there is praying. And if you talk to some of them, they'll be like, yeah, we do this, but it's more metaphorical. God is nature. You know, Baruch Spinoza was a philosopher who got excommunicated from the Jewish community for basically saying God is nature. And they feel like they are very similar to humanistic Jews. And when I say, how many of your regular congregants, the regular folks in the pews actually know all of this kind of higher level philosophy around it? They don't know because they don't talk about it, because they don't say God is a metaphor before they start doing the 2 hours of prayer to that metaphor. And so I can't go for any of that, but if that's what gives them meaning, then that's fine, and good for them. But I really love that. So having grown up at like Yom Kippur, you may have heard of, is supposedly the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. It's a fast day. You don't eat. You think about death and what you've done wrong in the past year and how you can do better in the coming year. And it's a whole day of prayer. And the first time I went to a humanistic Yom Kippur service, first of all, it was only about an hour and a half. And then there was a break. And then we came back. And the rabbi said, I understand some of you may be fasting today as an expression of Jewish identity, but for the rest of us, right after this service, we're going to go eat lunch at this diner up the block. And I'm like, this is my community. You know, like to be able to just openly say the things that most Jews are doing anyway, it's still not really happening in a lot of places in the Jewish community. And I don't know that there's a parallel so much in some of the other religions, because other religions are less tied in to an ethnic identity. But anyway, thank you for that.
So
any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a couple. You got Eugene's question about Reconstruction.
Okay.
You're very good. Sherry had raised her hand. Sherry, you have something to ask? You're muted, Sherry. That's right.
Hang on a second, got to be patient. I just wanted to say that, you know, it is interesting. I remember the first time our old humanist president had what I call a Christmas sweater on, because it was a tree and it was red and it was green. And, you know, I come from a Jewish family and that's how I identify myself, you know, and sometimes I say I am Jewish, but more that my background is Judaism, because it does shape you. I mean, there are some typically political and philosophical things that Jews have in common. My husband is also Jewish, well, yes and no. He was raised by very progressive political atheists who had matzah balls one Passover served with gravy, which actually was a dichotomy that never kind of resolved. But, they were like a little Jewish.
They were
but-
Jew-ish.
Or Jew light, as some people have said. But, in our lifetime, we really have, seen Scientology emerge. We've seen Kwanzaa emerge. And these are basically just, I don't mean any disrespect, but they're made up holidays, made up religions, mostly like all religions are. But what was I going to say? There was something in here. There was more comments. But we had also Carl Sagan's daughter as a speaker, and she embodied very nicely pretty much the Christian version of you, that all of these holidays were kosher, if you will, and that you can celebrate. Pardon?
Carl Sagan and his wife were both Jews. She's Jewish.
Okay, then I got the religion mixed up. But basically, she was also owning the traditions.
Right.
But I think from my Jewish background, one of the benefits that I get is that, you don't proselytize, because I think that's kind of a cool ethical, statement. I don't want people getting into my business. But I enjoyed your talk. I hope it helped.
Thanks. And you brought up an interesting example though of Kwanzaa, which is not religious. It's cultural and it's ritualized culture, and it's celebrated much more widely now than it has been in the past. Like, it has grown in celebration, and like I said, my kids are in elementary and middle school, and they do Kwanzaa celebrations, and it's not, from what I've seen, not at all incorporating religion, but it is incorporating values, and it is based on African culture. And that's a great example of something that started really small, that nobody heard of, and over the years, the folks who found it meaningful kept doing it, spread it, shared it with other people, and now it's pretty wide. Certainly, New York City, all the schools do it, and I think it's great. And the more the merrier, because it's not saying to anyone else, this is how you're supposed to do it, and the way you're doing it is wrong. It's the more the merrier. So I think that's a really good example. As far as other religions like Scientology, it's a whole other conversation, right? I mentioned at the beginning that the Pew survey is tracking the rise of the nuns. But when you break that down, there's three distinct groups in there. There's atheists, self-identified atheists, self-identified agnostics, and then people who claim they are nothing in particular. And the atheists and agnostics are way more well-educated, way more politically active, way more charitable than those who are, than Americans in general. And those who are nothing in particular are much lower on those measures than Americans in general. So the nothings in particular are not atheist agnostic. They are believing in some kind of magical thing. I mean, I think sale of magic crystals has grown a lot in the past couple of decades. I mean, people really still imbue inanimate objects with meaning or stories. I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction writer, and I don't know how they don't see that he just wrote science fiction, that he called it religion. But again, if it gives people meaning, that's one thing. If it allows them to then place policies that affect other people, that's where I feel we have to step up and say, do what you want to do, but don't tell us that this is the right way to do it or not. I see Fred and then Robert.
Yeah, Fred?
Thank you. I grew up in a Jewish household. As my wife Sherry mentioned, my parents were, I'd say, devout atheists. In my community, I grew up in Brooklyn. The tip of the Coney Island Peninsula was Seagate. It was sort of a gated community. There was a conservative temple, and the rabbi lived 2 doors down from me. He had a son my age. We were friends. He'd play at my house. I'd play at his house. And as I got older, approaching bar mitzvah age, it was obvious I wasn't going to be bar mitzvah. There was never any comment or anything said to me when I was at his house. They were totally accepting that, we were friends, and I was welcome in his house. He was welcome in mine. But which always impressed me. But the culmination was years later in high school. I was on the track team. On Yom Kippur, I was going to work out. I was dressed in sweats, walking down the street, and the rabbi is coming home from temple, and he stopped and said, "Oh, have you been?
Really?
Haven't seen you lately, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Well, busy in high school, son was in school," and that was that. And the fact that there was no judgment impressed me. At the same time, I had an Italian friend who was Roman Catholic, and if he missed a mass on Sunday, he was afraid to go back because he would catch hell from the priest.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy always made an impression on me.
You may have been lucky with that rabbi. I don't think all rabbis would have let you slide,
I
but
second you.
but I do think that there's a little bit less of it. I will tell you all a secret about bar mitzvah, which is the Jewish coming of age ritual. You become bar mitzvah when you turn 13, if you're a boy, automatically. It's like eligible to drive when you're 17 or whatever the law is. Basically, the Jewish law is that starting at age 13, and I think 12 for girls, you take on the mitzvot, which are the Jewish laws I talked a little bit about. So in other words, in theory, I don't know where you would get it from, but if you're a 10-year-old Jewish boy and you eat shrimp, that's not a sin until you're past 13, right? So 13 is the age when of adulthood as far as Judaism is concerned for the laws of Judaism. When you have, like what fasting on Yom Kippur, you don't have to fast if you're 11. Once you hit 13, you're supposed to be fasting on Yom Kippur. So the rabbi knew that whether you did a ritual or not, at 13, you did have a bar mitzvah, whether you were running track that day or not. But yeah, look, what you're saying about the track, though, does remind me of both Hank Greenberg in the 40s and Sandy Koufax in the 60s. Those of you who are baseball fans did not play on Yom Kippur, even though their teams were playing. And that was a huge morale boost for the Jewish community, even though neither of those people were at all religious. So again, it's an example of where identity overlaps with Judaism to the point where you can't separate out. Like Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg did not go to synagogue that day. They just didn't play. And so it's not like they were religious. It was an expression of identity, and it was incredibly powerful. And one thing I will add, which I didn't mention, which is why does it matter at all? Like what? Like if my kids who have choice between to incorporate Jewish and Japanese and American identities, and maybe they'll get married to some half Italian, half Guatemalan person, and then their kids will have like 5 different possible cultures to choose from. Like, why do I care what it means that they're connected to the Jewish experience? Is I'm a white man in America with certain privileges that I didn't ask for, and I want to reject. And being connected to the Holocaust, being connected to a religious minority, I think engenders empathy for other minorities.
Yes.
And it's not for all people. This is a broad generalization. I know plenty of Jewish people who are total jerks, but I think in general, being part of a minority group helps you see the world through a certain lens that being part of an overwhelming majority group doesn't allow you to. Now, as humanists, we can certainly, I think, recognize that. And like one of the weirdest things to me is that most humans believe in God, like most, overwhelmingly. And how is it that we are so clear-minded about reality, and so many of our fellow humans are living their lives based on fantasy? But I'm glad to be able to have a place where I can actually say so out loud, because certainly in other countries, it could be a death penalty, but even in the US, you don't hear it and see it. And it's important for us to come together and with other people who share that. And so coming from that minority perspective, I think is hugely helpful for me in working on behalf of other minorities who haven't had the kind of privileges that Jews in America have had. Robert?
Yeah, my question before about teaching morality, I wanted to try to make it simple, but I guess it's not really a simple question. Two elements of background. One was I grew up Catholic, became essentially atheist. I willing, if a God appeared in the sky and, and I knew I wasn't hallucinating, then, I would probably believe the pronouncement, if crowds of people saw the same thing. But, I'm willing to accept evidence. So I would say, well, I'm not atheist in the sense that I reject any possible evidence of there being spiritual stuff. But anyway, I grew up Catholic, and like has been mentioned, when you grow up within a religion, you tend to take on some of the principles. That's partly how you can learn morality, is within religions. And, for example, for me, I still, even after leaving the Catholic Church, I still believed when I got married, I was, there were things that stick with you. You feel it, even though you know that at some point I did end up getting divorced. But we raised our children Catholic, not because I didn't want to. I was thinking more like Unitarian. But my ex, only because she was an ex-Catholic also, the only church that she felt comfortable with was Catholicism. So we raised our kids Catholic. Anyway, but because of our concern for being able to give enough lessons in morality. And I think I've talked to other couples who have felt the same way of, if you have children, you want them to get some exposure. I have a friend now who has grandkids who, the parents are split up. The one who's not Jewish is bringing the grandkids to Jewish instructions.
Right.
For that reason, to get some background in morality. And there was an article, I think, in the Atlantic, and I'm forgetting the author, that talked about, besides religion, as far as learning morality, there are also like former groups like the Boy Scouts, where you learn principles of, not throwing garbage if you go out camping, not, leaving it better than you found it.
Right.
So it seems like governments or, societies should have some caring about the structure of the building of the morality of their citizens. And it doesn't seem to me, there's some of the laws and some politics that go on, but now it's kind of scary as far as in the country, there seems to be a loss of principle and sticking with principles and morality.
I appreciate that. And I think that, so a couple of responses. One is, I do think that the secular organizing world, like this community and like Humanistic Judaism, and I actually last weekend was with the Secular Coalition for America, which are a bunch of other organizations working on advocacy for secular Americans. Altogether, we can do a better job in providing ethical teachings for young people. That's for sure. And there's been a lot of conversation about just civics, the idea of civics, and that is not being taught in schools. But one aspect that I think we as secular people should kind of dispel is the notion that that can only come from religion, or that it even does come from religion. Because if you look at the countries with the least amount of religion, they also have the least amount of crime, right? So it's like the US is a fairly religious country. Certainly in the industrialized world, it's one of the most religious communities, and we've got the highest rate of gun violence. We have, murder rate, like crime, all of that stuff is not related to how much religion those people do or do not grow up with. I think there's just a ton of complicated societal factors. I think secular people in general do a really good job raising moral children, but there's also a correlation between secularity and education. And I think education is so key on that. But yeah, so those are all important. And what you started with, though, reminded me, which I didn't do, which I always want to do, which is define my terms. And atheist is a term I want to define. When I say, and the problem is there's multiple meanings for different people. But for me, when I say atheist, I mean I don't believe in the God of the Bible or any other man-made gods. But as far as what else might be out there in the universe, I'm agnostic, because how can I know? I think that, human learning and wisdom has a long way to go. But I think the way that we're going to find out is through the scientific method and not by digging through the ancient texts of our ancestors. Like, I don't think they had the answer to what is going on in the universe. I think it's up to us to use science and reason and logic, et cetera, to figure that out. So I'm comfortable with the phrase atheist and agnostic, but there is definitely a political angle to the word atheist as well, which is pushing back on the expectation of religiosity. Like I said, I was in DC last weekend for the Secular Coalition for America. We heard from one of the co-founders. There is now a Free Thought Caucus in Congress. I don't know if you know that, but it was co-founded by Congressman Jamie Raskin and Jared Huffman. So Jared Huffman is out in Northern California, and he's the only openly secular member of Congress, House or Senate. And so that's one out of, 335 legislators. And we're at least 10% of, if you only go by people who say they're atheists in America, and we're completely underrepresented in our Congress, and it's because of this sense that it is political suicide to admit that you are atheist agnostic. So Jamie Raskin identifies as a Reconstructionist Jew, so we kind of touched on Reconstructionism and God as a metaphor, et cetera, but it gives him this kind of cover. And I'm not going to demand that he declare, like, he has referenced himself as a humanist in other places, but he doesn't need to plant a flag necessarily, because the policies that he's implementing are with secular people in mind. So this Free Thought Caucus is intended to hear from secular people. If your congressperson is not in the Free Thought Caucus, then you could just go Google it and see who's in it. That's something that you can advocate for and say you want your voice heard, and they at least listen. You don't need to be obviously, if Huffman is the only openly secular person, he's the co-chair. All the rest of the people, there's about 22 congresspeople on that list, from people who identify as Christian, Jewish, Hindu, and Muslim. I encourage you to talk to your legislator about being on that, because what it says is we understand there are people in this country who are not religious, and the key issue is separation of church and state, that government should not be preferencing one religion over all others or no religion.
Okay, thank you. Eugene commented to Rob's question, some of that education happens in high school English or history classes, but maybe not as a primary focus. And then Robin Rosales had a question for you. I think you touched a little bit, if you'd expand on, how do humanistic Jews recognize life cycle rituals, marriage, death, birth, coming of age, whatever it may be?
Yeah, first of all, anybody here, if you're interested, please be in touch with me offline and I can point you to some examples. But we start with what had the Jewish tradition been, and then we say which parts of it are supernatural that we don't want to say, and what can we replace it with that is ethical and humanistic in expression. So we still do all of the Jewish holidays. We tend to be somewhat cerebral groups. So we may look at the actual history of it. We certainly the ethical conversations around it. And this is, we do care about educating our kids with a certain ethic, but it is recognizing that these stories are myth, most of them. And what can we gain from myth, though? Myth is still relevant if you recognize it as myth and then want to learn from it. The humanistic or universalist piece of it is that I don't have to only stick with my own people's myths. I can look at mythology from everywhere and draw conclusions from it, or ethical teachings. I don't want to have to be limited to my own people's history of ethical teachings. I want to take the best from everywhere. So I definitely kind of fall more universalist, but when it comes to, like, for example, a coming of age ceremony as my son emerges into young adulthood, there's a value in doing that. And it has nothing to do with appeasing a higher power. It is for the child's own benefit to stand in front of their friends and family and community and kind of declare themselves as entering adulthood. And that's the power in that ritual. So the bar mitzvahs in our movement don't read from the Torah unless the kid really wants to. It is not tied to the Torah portion of that week the way it is in the whole rest of Judaism. And it focuses on the ethical values of the child. So in many of our communities, they pick a humanistic Jewish role model or a Jewish role model. And Carl Sagan certainly has come up for many, many of these bar mitzvah heroes. And then the kid will write a report about it and read the report as part of the ceremony. But there's also just rituals, and we still have blessings or meditations. Some people are not comfortable with the word blessing. Like, for example, wine is still used ritually, and I also like to drink it, right? So it's a plus, it's a bonus. So before you drink something, you can have a moment of thankfulness, right? Thankfulness is a secular expression too. It can be religious, but who are you thanking when you're doing it religiously, and who are you thanking when you do it secularly? So the translation to our wine, one of our blessings for the wine is to thank the people who brought forth wine from the earth, right? It took some people to actually make this wine, and we can be thankful toward them. There's a parallel in Japanese culture, which is before and after a meal. There's just an expression that you say in Japanese, and at the end of it, it's like a thank you. And what I've learned is you're not just thanking the person who prepared the meal, but you're actually thanking the animal that you just ate. So but the Shinto religion emerges out of animism, and they're focused and connected to nature. And to have that one moment of recognizing that, and vegetarianism has not caught on in Japan. So they still eat tons of fish. They don't really understand why you wouldn't, but they do have this moment after every meal where there's a moment of thankfulness, and included in that is the thing we just ate. So I love that, and I appreciate it, and I wish I had more moments of thankfulness in my life. So if there are rituals that can kind of force that, then that's great for me. And it's not great for everyone, but if it's something that you think you might benefit from, this liturgy is readily available, and we share it all the time, and especially during the major holidays like Hanukkah and Passover, something I'm happy to send to you if you're interested.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other comments or anybody else.
I'd like to say something.
Sherry, we had someone in the room raise their hand for a comment.
Can I come up?
Yes, please.
So I also
Camera, so you can see you.
I also grew up in a Jewish family. I have two comments, and maybe you can respond. Firstly, you said a lot about identity. And for me, I regard my identity, my ethnic identity, as being with the human race in its entirety, full stop. And the second related point is this. I see the word humanism as really being centered upon the word human in it. And by that, I mean, instead of focusing on our relationship to a non-existent supernatural realm, instead, humanists are focused upon our relationship with other humans.
Thank you.
Sure. And look, all of us have, I don't, you all probably remember, I used to love, I had a great hi-fi stereo back when you had physical music, right? And it had these sliders on it that I would always be playing with about bass and treble, and you would move these sliders over, and then went from one speaker to another. Remember those physical slider things? So all of us have kind of these sliders, and one of the categories is universalist or particularist, right? And having worked in the organized Jewish community pluralistically, many Jews in America are much closer to that particularist side of that slider, and many humanistic Jews are much closer to that universalist side of the slider. And what you are describing, I would say, is pretty much all the way over to the universalist side, and that's fine, and I appreciate that, and I get it. And as I said, my family is mixed ethnicity, mixed race, and I am all for that. What I would hope for, though, is that in this vision of a universalist world, we don't have to give up the good with the bad. And so I do think that the bathwater that we're getting rid of is superstition and religious belief, dogma, and religious persecution, which still exists way too much. But the baby that we don't want to get rid of, I think, is the stuff that makes life meaningful and interesting. And I think all cultures have something to contribute to that. And I think we would lose something if we had to give up, like someone had mentioned, matzo balls. And, does matzo ball become universalized? I mean, obviously, anyone can walk into the Second Avenue Deli and get a matzo ball soup, and I highly recommend that you do. But does it no longer connect to Jewish food? And there are folks who are completely culinary Jews. It's the only connection they have to their Jewish identity. And that's fine. But why would we have to give that up? And at the same time, last night I had Korean barbecue, and it's great, right? So, and that's just food, right? But there's music, there's art, there's all kinds of things that emerge out of religious tradition that I don't want to give up. And so it's the Jewish piece that I'm bringing to my family, because I don't speak Japanese, and I know more Japanese history than my wife does, but I can't say any of the names correctly. So it's, what can we bring with us to this glorious secular future that will make it meaningful and interesting? I personally don't think we have to give it all up to do that, but I totally hear and understand the idea that let's get past all of it and just go straight to the humanism. Like, my vision is very much aligned with Star Trek, where it's the Federation and it's a one world government. I know I'm a globalist, right? Trump's worst nightmare. I'm an actual globalist. Like, I want to get past nationalism. I think nationalism overall is a bad thing, etc. So I totally get the universalist thing, but my slider is a little closer to the particularist. Sherry had wanted to ask a question, and then I see Robert's hand up.
I basically wanted to address Robin when she was asking about traditions and death. From a background in hospice, I had gone to a lovely seminar panel where all the different traditions, religious, were invited to speak to the traditions of, burial and saying goodbye. And one of the speakers was a humanist atheist, which I thought was rather, phenomenally wonderful. But one of the traditions that Jewish burial has, which I think is interesting and I wanted to share, is to not embalm the body, which I think is just kind of respectful and letting well enough be, from ashes to ashes without preservatives, I suppose. And then also the body does not get adorned in their best Sunday outfit and jewelry. It's rather covered with a shroud, which is just a very, I look at it as a comfortable covering. It's like at the end of the day, you want to take off your tight garments and get into, jammies or something. And I think that's just a very peaceful way of resting forever, even though you're not feeling it. But one of the neat things is that there's somebody assigned in Jewish tradition to stay with the body to make sure, I don't know, vultures don't eat it, or, bad things don't happen to it. And it's considered the final, most wonderful good deed or mitzvah, because that person cannot thank you for that deed. And just as a human being, I think that's a very cool concept, to do things without expectation of gratitude. It's kind of like the Zorro of, death transition, if you will. And with that, I just wanted to say very, very emphatically that I do not believe that morality is learned from religion. I think it's learned from example. I think it's innate. I think there are a lot of problems with the world. If religion was in charge of morality, you would never have a Catholic priest doing anything naughty. It's just, I don't see the connection at all with morality being learned from religion. But I think most of the commandments are okay. I'm trying to think if there are any that I dispute. I haven't read them in a while.
Well, the first four are about your relationship with God, so I kind of strike those right from the.
What was the first and second?
It's like, if you look at the Jewish one, it's like, I'm the only God, and then you shall have no other gods above me, like this.
Oh, then I've been reading the wrong commandments. Okay.
And of course, ending slavery was not at all among any of those commandments, which makes you wonder if maybe the whole thing wasn't actually written by people and not God. Robert.
Yeah, I have difficulty with the universalist view, just because one of my philosophical leanings is the extreme complexity of reality, of the universe, of the world, of our country, of our state. You can get down to smaller and smaller sizes, and when you think about how much you don't know about all the other people who are residing there, one of the things that came to mind, I saw an article about Papua New Guinea. Now, how many people read a news item about Papua New Guinea and know what's going on there now? There are more sources of information now, and people travel more, but still, if you travel all your life, you still can't get to know all the people. And it's like, in my mind, when people say, talk as if they know what it means to be Chinese, there are more than a billion Chinese people. And I had a well-educated friend of the family who believed, because in graduate school he got treated poorly by some Chinese graduate students, that he knew all about how terrible Chinese people were. Now, I think it's hard to say, like in different cultures. I believe that there was a meme on the internet that struck me as being an important thing. Basically, it said that you can start with respect and have people unearn respect, rather than having the idea of people have to earn it. You don't respect them until they earn it. And I think there's that thing. We can start off with respect, but it's like, if we find out a culture believes in pedophilia, or they believe in cannibalism, or what, in Papua New Guinea, there are 300 different tribes with different languages, 300 different languages in the country. And, and we don't know any one of those to have an idea. Their problem, the news article was about that traditionally there was fighting, but with traditional instruments like spears and knives. Now the death rates are going up because they're importing automatic weapons. So they're getting modern.
Right. Now, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate it. And I think that, again, this is like a balance of the beautiful or potentially not so beautiful complexity of human life and expression. At the same time, I think the purpose of humanism is to find the commonality so that we can see the value in every human person. And so I think that when you dig down on it, there are some unifying principles, but I want to maintain that complexity and diversity, and I think we're able to. I think we have the capability to experience wonderful multiple things. All right, I don't know how long we're supposed to go. I do have to get back. How long did we block this off for?
We have one question, one person in the room. I have hopefully a quick question for you.
Okay.
Question and comment. Thank you for being with us today. It's very interesting. I was raised traditionally conservative Jewish, and I'm thinking a lot lately. You know, I'm an atheist. I do not participate in any religious rituals, but I can't help knowing that I culturally, ethnically, traditionally, historically am a descendant of people who have been observant Jews. And so you started out trying to, you know, who is a Jew? Is it a religion? Is it a culture? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a race? Is it a history? Is it a tradition? Unlike many other religions, it's much more than just following a religious dogma. As you said, you can be a Jew and observe zero of the traditions. So I appreciate your looking into that. I wanted to talk about prayer. You said that
We run out of time, Lisa. Is there a question here for the author?
question?
Yeah.
No, I wanted to tell him something
Okay.
quickly. You talk about, you know, saying the prayer and expressing appreciation. When my mother died, I couldn't say the traditional Jewish Kaddish because it's praising God. So I came up with this. I said, nice mom, glad I had her, gonna miss her.
You
And-
just
and-
you reinvented humanistic Judaism. I mean, that's the whole
But
point, right?
The idea of prayer is to acknowledge,
Yeah.
and you can thank God, or you can just acknowledge, hey, nice wine, glad to have it.
Right.
Hey, great
exactly.
day, glad we made it. So,
Yeah. I remember being, Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that
thank
out.
you. I appreciate it. And if you want more elaborate kind of flowery liturgy that
Read
does
'em.
reference God,
I have
then-
Sherman Wine's book,
Okay,
Celebrations.
great. Great. Yeah, exactly. And so he wrote a lot of stuff, but you know, we've got folks throughout our movement, and that's part of the nice thing. And like I said, you did it as well. People write what is meaningful to them, and then if it's meaningful to other people may take it on as well. So that's great. I remember. Thank you for that. I remember not too long ago, I did a Shiva call. So someone had mentioned the Jewish ritual of mourning, and you go and sit with the person who lost somebody. And I went to a friend, and I didn't know that she was going to have a rabbi come. I actually know the rabbi that came. And the first thing she did with that liturgy is to thank God. And I just remember sitting there, frankly, being infuriated and saying, the last thing I want to do if I lose a loved one is thank God. You know, I want to rage. I want to be angry or whatever my emotions are. I'm not going to pretend to be thankful for this, let alone to be thankful to a God that I don't believe in. So I totally appreciate that. And then the only other thing I wanted to add to what you said about who's a Jew, Humanistic Judaism has a much broader definition of who's a Jew than any of the other Jewish denominations. It's on our website. I don't have it memorized, but it basically boils down to, if you say you're Jewish and you're genuine, we accept you as Jewish, right?
Or if the Nazis say you're Jewish, then you're Jewish.
That's how other people, that's a definition that other people use. But in other words,
Very short comment here about morality. If you and I decided we want to live in proximity to each other, we couldn't accomplish that if we both didn't already have confidence that neither one of us was going to kill the other person in our sleep. Morality is prerequisite to that choice.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that we've had this great conversation and that folks are interested enough in all these topics to continue it. And I wish I had more time, but I know my kids are waiting on me today. But I thank you so much for allowing me to talk a little bit about humanistic Judaism.
We appreciate it. Thank you much.
Great. Okay, take care, everybody.